The scent of dust and detergent clung to the basement air as I set my last box down. Still, upstairs echoed with Eric and Melissa's laughter, as if nothing had changed. As I stared at the space where my things once were, the cold realization hit. This was their idea of family. While I unpacked, the weight of it all settled in. The house wasn't just mine anymore. It was a prize they thought they'd won. That's when I made my move. I signed the papers, and with one stroke, their names were gone. My sons, my daughter-in-law's. We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence. It lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The paper grocery bags cut into my fingers as I nudged the front door open with my hip. A steady Seattle drizzle still clung to my sleeves, the kind that smells like wet cedar and exhaust. The house was unusually quiet. No television, no music, just the faint hum of the refrigerator somewhere deep inside. I started up the stairs toward my room. The door was half open. That was the first wrong note. Melissa never left doors half open. She preferred her boundaries crisp, deliberate. I pushed it wider and stopped. The bed was gone. The nightstands, the rug I'd chosen with my late husband 25 years ago, gone. In their place, bare hardwood, a rolled-up yoga mat, and the echo of my own breath. For a second I thought there'd been a break-in. Then I heard her voice float up from the hallway. "Linda, you're home early." Melissa appeared, smile glued in place, manicured hands still damp from cleaning spray. "Hope you don't mind. We're setting up the guest suite for our friends this weekend." I stared at her, the way you might stare at a mirror that suddenly shows someone else's face. "My bedroom," I said slowly. "Is the guest suite?" She laughed, light, rehearsed. "Oh, you'll love the basement. It's cozy, private, and closer to the laundry, which you use anyway." Behind her, Eric hovered at the top of the stairs, phone in his hand, eyes not quite meeting mine. "It's temporary, Mom," he murmured. "Just until they leave." Temporary. I looked past him and saw Sophie peeking from the landing, her small hands gripping the banister. She looked confused, sensing a shift even her 10-year-old vocabulary couldn't name. I nodded once, too calmly. "Of course," I said. "Guests should be comfortable." Melissa clapped her hands. "Perfect. I'll help move your boxes." But she didn't. When I came back with the last grocery bag, the upstairs hallway was empty except for a faint trace of her perfume, something floral and smug. Downstairs, the basement door groaned open. I flicked the light switch. The bulbs buzzed awake, revealing a space that smelled of detergent and concrete dust. My boxes were stacked against the wall like forgotten luggage. Someone had shoved my lamp behind the water heater. I set the groceries on the washing machine and stood there, absorbing it, the insult disguised as organization. The house above me creaked with their footsteps. Melissa's heels clicked from room to room. Eric's lower voice followed, placating. I imagined them arranging fresh linens on my bed, fluffing the pillows I'd chosen, laughing about how Mom won't mind. I sat on the edge of an old trunk and tried to breathe past the tightness in my chest. My late husband had built that trunk for me our first winter together. He'd called it Linda's safe. Funny how safety migrates. Upstairs, downstairs, wherever people decide you belong. Sophie's small voice drifted through the vent. "Mom, why can't Grandma stay upstairs?" Melissa's reply came sweet as frosting. "Because the basement's cozier, honey. She loves it down there." A silence followed. Then Sophie again, quieter. "I don't think she does." I smiled, a thin, private thing. Children see what adults paint over. I began unpacking just enough to look civilized. A chair, a blanket, the framed photo of my husband and me at Pike Place Market, both of us squinting against the wind. The rest I left boxed. I wanted the space to feel temporary, even if they didn't. When Eric finally came down that evening, he lingered at the bottom step. "It's just for a couple of days," he said. "You know how Melissa likes to host." I kept folding a sweater, smoothing it flat. I know exactly how Melissa likes to host. He sighed, rubbing his temple. "Please, Mom, don't make this harder." I looked up at him, my son who had inherited his father's eyes but none of his backbone. "I'm not making it harder, Eric. I'm remembering it accurately." He opened his mouth, closed it again, and left. The light above me flickered once, then steadied. I poured myself a glass of water from the sink, took a sip, and whispered into the hum of the basement, "You just made the worst real estate decision of your life." Upstairs, laughter erupted, the bright, careless kind that always follows cruelty. I set the glass down carefully, letting the sound of it meeting the counter ring out like a quiet promise. I would not raise my voice. I would not beg for respect in a house that still bore my name. But the next time anyone came down those stairs, the foundation of this family would already have begun to shift, one signature at a time. By dinner, the rain had thickened into a steady percussion on the skylight, each drop a small reminder that things leak quietly before they break. I took my usual seat at the end of the table, though usual had apparently become a flexible concept in this house. Melissa had set the table like a magazine spread, candles flickering, plates rimmed with gold, the smell of rosemary chicken filling the air. She moved between kitchen and dining room in that floaty way she had when she wanted to look effortless. "Wine?" she asked brightly, already pouring before I could answer. "Thank you," I said, watching the deep red swirl into the glass. The liquid caught the light, almost mocking in its elegance. Sophie sat beside me, her fork scraping at mashed potatoes. Eric reached for the salt, pretending nothing was wrong, but his silence felt weighted, defensive. Melissa sat, folded her napkin in her lap, and said as though reading a line, "So, I hope the basement's comfortable. We added a new lamp down there." I smiled just enough to be polite. "Yes, I noticed. It's functional." Eric cleared his throat. "It's temporary, Mom. Just until the guests leave." I turned to him slowly. "Of course, temporary disrespect is still disrespect." He winced. And the candlelight caught the faint tremor in his hand. Melissa's eyes lifted, her tone brittle under the sugar. "Oh, Linda, come on. We're family, not tenants. You make everything sound so transactional." I leaned back, letting the chair creak a little. "Transactions are how people show value, Melissa. Words are how they hide it." Her smile didn't falter, but I saw it freeze. Right there at the edges, where charm meets control. The silence stretched, brittle as glass. Even Sophie stopped eating. Somewhere in the distance, the house's foundation groaned as if it too were tired of holding everything up. I glanced at the dining table, tracing the grain of the oak with my eyes. I remembered sanding it with my husband, the way we'd argued over stain colors, finally settling on warm walnut. 25 years later, the same table sat here, hosting my own quiet eviction. Melissa sipped her wine, pretending she hadn't lost control of the room. "We're just trying to make everyone comfortable. You like comfort, don't you?" I let the question hang unanswered. Comfort is relative, I thought. So is ownership. When I finally rose from the table, the movement startled them both. I gathered my plate and silverware, the stem of my wineglass balanced in one hand. "Linda," Eric started, but I cut him off gently. "I'll eat downstairs. You two deserve the space." Sophie's eyes widened. "Grandma, you don't have to." "I know, sweetheart." I reached over, tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "I just prefer quiet with my dinner." The silence I left behind was the kind that hums in people's ears long after you leave a room. Downstairs, the air felt cooler. The ceiling muffled their conversation, short, hushed bursts, the language of guilt disguised as concern. I set the plate on the washing machine, took a bite of the chicken. It tasted like someone else's celebration. The basement light flickered again, steadying after a moment, and I noticed the old metal file cabinet near the dryer. I hadn't opened it in years. Dust lined the handles, the faint ghost of my fingerprints from another life. I set down my fork, crossed to it, and tugged the drawer. It stuck halfway, then gave with a reluctant sigh. Inside were folders, tax returns, appliance warranties, letters from the bank. Near the back, one folder stood out. Thick, cream-colored, the edges curled with age. House deed. I drew it out carefully. My name printed in bold type across the top. Linda M. Carver. The ownership line caught the light like scripture. My breath slowed. The paper smelled faintly of dust and ink, solid things that didn't pretend to love you. I sat on the edge of the trunk again, spreading the document across my knees. Upstairs, I heard Melissa laugh, brittle and high-pitched, the sound of someone who believes they've already won. I smiled. A small, deliberate gesture that wasn't amusement so much as acknowledgement. The chicken grew cold beside me. I didn't care. My fingers traced the embossed seal on the deed, the legal heartbeat of the house. Some people swing fists when they're disrespected. Others sharpen pens. By the time I folded the papers back into the file, the air felt lighter, like the storm outside had shifted direction. Let them toast upstairs. Let them think the world was still tilting their way. Tomorrow, I'd begin tilting it back. The next morning, Seattle felt like it had been rinsed clean and left damp to dry. The clouds hung low enough to brush the roofs, and the streets shimmered with puddles that mirrored stoplights in broken color. I drove through the drizzle with both hands steady on the wheel, the deed folder riding shotgun like a secret passenger. The windshield wipers squeaked at an uneven rhythm, just fast enough to keep me from seeing too clearly, which somehow suited my mood. Howard Ames's office sat above a florist and across from a coffee shop that hadn't changed in 20 years. I used to wait for my husband here during tax season, reading magazines while he and Howard hashed out numbers and mortgages and life plans that seemed endless at the time. Now I was here alone, carrying the evidence of how long endless really lasts. The receptionist glanced up when I entered. "Mrs. Carver, Mr. Ames is just finishing a call. Can I get you coffee?" "Black," I said. "No sugar." I sat by the window. Outside, people hurried under umbrellas, moving fast through their own small storms. When Howard's door finally opened, he looked almost exactly as I remembered. Tie slightly crooked, glasses low on his nose, kindness half hidden behind sarcasm. "Linda," he said, surprised warmth in his voice. "It's been too long." "Not long enough," I said with a faint smile. "I've come to update a few things." He gestured me inside. "Let's sit down before you scare me." His office smelled of paper and rain-soaked wool. I laid the folder on his desk. "I want to update the title," I said. He stopped halfway into his chair. "The house title?" "Yes." He studied me. "Is everything all right?" "Oh, perfectly fine," I said, folding my hands neatly in my lap. "I've just been relocated." That earned a soft laugh. "Relocated?" "To the basement," I said, meeting his eyes. The laugh caught, turned into a cough. "You're serious." "Serious enough," I said evenly, "to move them off my property as easily as they moved me." He leaned back, nodding slowly, like a man switching from friendly to professional mode. "All right. Then let's talk options. You want to sell? Transfer?" "Neither," I said. "I want to protect it. From entitlement, from memory loss, from the idea that kindness is permanent ownership." Howard smiled faintly. That sounds like you. I'd like to create a trust, I continued. Private, quiet. Something with my name still on the deed, but insulated. Carver Family Trust? He offered. No, I said. Carver Legacy Trust. Let's not assume they're part of it. He chuckled again, but softer this time. You've thought this through. I've had an entire night of basement acoustics to think. Howard pulled a yellow pad closer, started scribbling. We'll need to file a transfer of ownership to the trust, name you as trustee and beneficiary, then record it with the county clerk. Standard procedure, you'll still control everything. I know, I said. That's the point. He looked up at me for a long moment. Linda, I've known you for decades. You don't make moves like this unless something snapped. I considered that. Maybe it didn't snap. Maybe it just aligned. He nodded once, almost in respect. All right then. The printer hummed to life, spitting out the first draft of paperwork. The sound filled the room like an engine idling, low, steady, inevitable. As he reviewed each page, I wandered to the window. Across the street, a young couple stood beneath a shared umbrella, laughing over coffee, unaware how fragile their future would be if one of them ever decided the other's comfort took precedence over their dignity. Howard set a pen beside the last page. You'll need to sign here, here, and initial there. Once we file, it's official. I sat back down, the pen cool between my fingers. Official, I repeated. I like the sound of that. My signature curved neatly across the line, decisive, not angry. Anger was messy. This was architecture. Howard watched me sign, then exhaled slowly. You know, your husband would have approved. I smiled, eyes still on the ink drying beneath my name. He taught me to balance books. I'm just balancing the family ledger. He slid the documents into a manila envelope. I'll file it first thing tomorrow. No, I said softly. File it today. Some things shouldn't wait overnight. He nodded, understanding without needing explanation. As I left the office, the rain had eased to a mist. I tucked the empty folder under my arm and paused outside, breathing in the damp air. The florist next door had a window full of white lilies. For a moment, I imagined placing them on my dining table. My table, upstairs again someday. Then I smiled to myself. Revenge doesn't always roar. Sometimes it signs quietly in triplicate. I opened my umbrella and stepped into the drizzle, each raindrop sounding like a clock tick toward inevitability. For the next week, I became everything Melissa wanted me to be: invisible, agreeable, domestic. Every morning, I climbed the basement stairs with folded laundry balanced in my arms, the scent of detergent rising like armor. She would be in the kitchen, scrolling her phone, coffee mug in hand, issuing gentle corrections disguised as kindness. Mom, the towels shouldn't be folded like that, she'd say. Guess like the corners tucked in. Of course, I'd reply, and refold them precisely how she wanted. I watered her plants, dusted the mantel, even polished the silver-framed photos of her perfect little family, the ones where my husband's face had been replaced by Eric's, history rewritten in glossy paper. Eric worked long hours or pretended to. Sophie went to school, then ballet, and when she came home, she'd sneak down to the basement to sit on the trunk while I ironed. She told me about her friends, her teacher, how her mom was extra nice lately. Guilt has good manners, I told her once. She didn't understand, but she smiled anyway. In the evenings, when the house went quiet, I'd spread papers across my basement table. Receipts, tax forms, utility bills, proof of all the invisible ways I'd kept this house breathing. The ink had faded on some, but my name was still legible. Linda M. Carver. The kind of proof no apology could overwrite. When Ruth called midweek, her voice was as direct as ever. "You sound calm?" "Too calm." "Calm is camouflage," I said, shifting another folder onto the growing stack. "Camouflage for what?" "For reconstruction." She snorted softly. "You're terrifying when you sound reasonable." "That's the goal," I said. "Noise warns people. Quiet rearranges them." From upstairs came the rhythmic sound of Melissa's laughter, sharp, rehearsed, bouncing off walls I paid to insulate. I pictured her sipping wine, rehearsing charm for her weekend guests. The sound didn't bother me anymore. It motivated me. Thursday afternoon, I drove to the post office to mail a few documents Howard had requested. Routine signatures, he'd said, just formalities for the Carver Legacy Trust. The clerk stamped them without question. The way people handle papers they'll never realize changed a family. Howard called that evening. "Everything's in motion," he said. "By next Tuesday, the title will show the trust as the sole owner. You'll be listed as trustee and lifetime beneficiary, completely airtight." I could hear the faint whir of a printer behind him. It reminded me of the sound of rain, a steady hum promising change. "Thank you, Howard," I said. "And remember, quietly. Always." After the call, I sat in the dark for a while, letting the basement hum around me. The water heater clicked softly. The pipes murmured. And through the vent I could hear Sophie's bedtime story drifting down. Eric reading, his voice soft but distant. Melissa's tone followed soon after, correcting even that. I stacked my folders neatly, sliding the newest confirmation letter to the top. Each page was another brick in my quiet rebuild, each signature a nail in the coffin of their assumption that I'd surrendered. By Friday, the weekend preparations began. Melissa filled the house with the scent of lemon polish and ambition. I stayed out of the way, moving silently between chores, polite and invisible. "Mom," she said that afternoon as I passed her in the hallway, "thank you for being so flexible. It means a lot to Eric and me." I met her eyes briefly. "Flexibility is how things don't break." She smiled, missing the point entirely. That night, as she arranged wine glasses on the counter, I sat downstairs, reading over the finalized trust documents Howard had emailed. The official seal glowed faintly under the lamplight, its embossed edge pressing into my thumb. Upstairs, laughter erupted as Melissa practiced her hostess voice. It carried down the vent like static. Grating. Endless. But beneath it, I could hear something else. The hum of the printer in Howard's office earlier that day, the sound of ownership quietly reprinting itself into truth. I folded the papers, placed them back into the file, and locked it in the trunk my husband had built me. Tomorrow, their guests would arrive. And when they did, I would be exactly what they saw: a harmless old woman doing laundry in a basement. But beneath the sound of rinse cycles and dinner parties, the engine had already started. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of brightness that never lasts in Seattle. Thin sunlight washing over wet streets, deceptive and short-lived. I woke before the others, made coffee in the basement, and listened to the sound of suitcases thudding onto hardwood upstairs. The guests had arrived. When I climbed the stairs, Melissa was already performing, lip-glossed, camera-ready, voice pitched too high with excitement. 2 women and a man stood in the foyer, all of them holding phones like weapons. The women wore matching blazers. The man carried a ring light. "Linda!" Melissa beamed as if we were co-hosts. "These are my collaborators from Lifestyle Lane. They'll be shooting a feature on family home makeovers." Isn't that fun? Fun wasn't the word that came to mind. Eric hovered behind them, smiling thinly. His tie was askew, his eyes apologetic. "It's just for a few days, Mom," he said softly, the phrase worn thin with use. The guests began moving through the house like wind in a museum, touching everything, rearranging furniture, sweeping aside whatever didn't fit their aesthetic. One of the women paused at a framed photo of my husband and me, frowning slightly before removing it from the wall. "Too dated," she murmured, handing it to Melissa, who didn't even look down as she said, "Put it in storage." I watched my life, 40 years of it, disappear into cardboard boxes labeled miscellaneous decor. "Maybe film this corner instead," Melissa said, gesturing toward the window seat where Sophie used to read. "We'll add a throw blanket, something cozy." The irony almost made me laugh. I was the only thing cozy left in that house, tucked away, silent, and entirely out of sight. By afternoon, the living room looked like a showroom. My oak table gleamed under a ring light. My curtains had been replaced with gauzy linen, and the walls that once held my family's photographs now displayed abstract prints Melissa probably found on clearance. I retreated to the kitchen for tea, the only place they hadn't yet colonized. From there, I could hear them filming upstairs. Their voices overlapped in the cheerful cadence of people pretending to have harmony. Melissa's tone shifted mid-laugh. "Once we sell this place, we can upgrade," she said. Casual, certain, the way she might talk about replacing a purse. The teacup trembled slightly in my hand. I set it down before it shattered. "Sell this place." I turned the kettle off and leaned on the counter, breathing evenly. The tiled backsplash reflected my face. Older, calmer, but unmistakably alive. The woman staring back wasn't broken. She was calculating. When Melissa came in a few minutes later, she looked flushed with victory. "Oh, there you are. Could you maybe stay out of frame for a bit? We're doing a walkthrough shot." "Of course," I said, my voice even. "Wouldn't want to ruin the illusion." She missed the bite in it. "Perfect. You're the best. Mom." The word mom had never sounded more like punctuation. I carried my tea downstairs, each step steady, deliberate. The laughter followed me like a draft, light, hollow, and unbearably young. In the basement, I opened my laptop and found the last email thread from Howard. The subject line read, "Carver Legacy Trust, draft completed." My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment. Then I began typing. "Move forward immediately, no delays. File and confirm once done." I read the message twice before hitting send. The hum of the computer blended with the muffled chatter from above. I imagined them toasting, planning content schedules, captioning my dining room with words like light-filled and authentic. Authentic. That word used to mean something when my husband was alive, when he and I built this place one paycheck at a time. Now it was just another hashtag they'd paste over other people's labor. I set my cup down, the ceramic ringing faintly against the washer's metal top. The basement air felt heavier tonight, denser with purpose. I crossed to the trunk, checked the folder once more. Deed, trust confirmation, receipts. All there. All in my name. Upstairs, a burst of laughter echoed through the vent. Sharp, unguarded, the sound of people who believed the ground beneath them would never shift. I smiled into the still air. Patience is a fragile virtue. Mine had just expired. By Monday morning, the rain had returned, the familiar, endless kind that blurs edges and hides intentions. I stood at the basement window, watching water carve thin rivers down the glass. The world above me moved fast. Mine didn't need to. Howard's email arrived at 9:42 a.m. sharp. Subject, Carver Legacy Trust, filed and recorded. Body, effective immediately. Sole authority vested in trustee, L. Carver. County record attached. I read it twice, then a third time, the words settling like smooth stones in my chest. Effective immediately. The house had already changed hands. Quietly. Completely. I printed the confirmation, the paper warm as it slid out of the machine. The official seal gleamed faintly in the dim light. Ownership, real, legal, and mine, had come home. Upstairs, I could hear Melissa giving someone directions over speakerphone. Her voice carried through the vent, clipped, managerial, the way she spoke when she thought she was building an empire. I folded the printout neatly and carried it to the small nightstand beside my basement bed. The Bible sat there, my husband's, its leather cracked from years of use. I slipped the document between the thin pages of Psalms and closed the cover gently, as if sealing a pact. By evening, the influencers had packed up their ring lights and left. The house smelled faintly of perfume and ambition. Melissa floated through the rooms humming to herself, already imagining the next performance. Eric helped her move furniture back, apologizing under his breath when he passed me on the stairs. I said nothing. Guilt needed silence to ferment. That night I slept soundly for the first time in weeks. The storm outside sang against the windows, and somewhere between the thunder and the wind, I could hear a quieter rhythm, the balance of power shifting back to its rightful place. The next morning, Melissa's voice jolted me awake. "Mom, the bank called." I climbed the stairs, still tying my robe, the calm already in place before I reached her. She stood by the kitchen island, phone in hand, face flushed with confusion. They said something about the mortgage information being restricted. Did you change something? I poured myself coffee, took a slow sip. Restricted? Yes, she said, impatience cracking through her composure. They're saying they can't discuss refinancing until the ownership records are updated. What does that even mean? I looked at her over the rim of my mug. It means you don't own this house. Her head jerked slightly, as if she'd been slapped. Excuse me? You're excused, I said simply, setting the cup down with a quiet click. The silence that followed was delicious. Long enough for her to process. Short enough for me to enjoy. Eric entered just then, holding Sophie's lunchbox. What's going on? Melissa turned to him, panic flickering at the edges of her voice. Your mother's being ridiculous. The bank... I interrupted softly. The bank was right to call. Titles have to stay current. I suppose they noticed the change. Eric's brow furrowed. What change? I met his eyes evenly. The Carver Legacy Trust now holds the deed. I'm the trustee, which means I make the decisions. For a moment, no one breathed. The clock on the wall ticked like a metronome marking disbelief. Melissa blinked, searching for footing. You can't just... I can, I said, almost kindly. Because I did. Sophie's small footsteps padded into the kitchen, backpack slung over her shoulder. Grandma, can you braid my hair before school? Of course, sweetheart. I took the brush from the counter, my hand steady, my smile unshaken. Melissa turned away, gripping the countertop as if the room had started tilting. Eric stood frozen between us, the realization dawning in real time. As I braided Sophie's hair, she chattered about spelling tests and a class pet rabbit. Melissa's reflection in the window was pale and silent behind her. When Sophie ran upstairs to grab her shoes, I finally spoke again. Don't worry, Melissa. The trust protects all of us, from rash decisions, unwise loans, and poor taste. Her voice came out brittle. This isn't over. Oh, I certainly hope not, I said. It's just getting interesting. I rinsed my coffee cup and placed it in the sink, feeling the calm spread like warmth through my chest. Upstairs, the floorboards creaked under Melissa's pacing, sharp, uneven, frantic. Downstairs, the Bible waited, the deed tucked safely between its pages. Humming with quiet authority. For the first time in years, the house finally sounded right again. Eric waited until after dinner to confront me. That was always his way. Wait for quiet, for dishes to dry and emotions to settle, and then step in as though reason might clean up what courage should have. I was in the basement, folding laundry into the neat, sharp stacks that had become my meditation. The air smelled faintly of starch and resolve. He came halfway down the stairs, hands shoved in his pockets. "Mom," he began, voice tight, "you can't just remove us." I didn't look up. I can. The law doesn't recognize rudeness as a title right. "Jesus, Mom," he muttered, taking another step down. "It was never about disrespect. Melissa she gets caught up in appearances. You know that." "Appearances?" I folded a towel, smoothed its edge. "Eric, I was demoted to the laundry room so she could film my bedroom. I think appearances are the least of her sins." He sighed, rubbing his temple like he was the one being burdened. "You've made your point. But taking the house, legally changing everything, that's extreme." I finally turned toward him. Extreme is a woman treating her mother-in-law like excess furniture. Extreme is you letting it happen because peace is easier than principle. He looked up sharply. "That's not fair." "Fair?" I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "You let her move my things downstairs like garbage. You let her erase your father's photo from the wall. Don't lecture me about fairness when you traded integrity for convenience." His jaw clenched. I could see the guilt flicker there. Small, stubborn, and real. "I didn't think she'd take it that far," he said. "No," I said quietly. "You just didn't think." We stood there in the dim light, the silence pressing between us. Upstairs, Sophie's laughter drifted faintly from her room. Innocent, untangled from all this. Eric took a shaky breath. "What happens now? Are you going to kick us out?" "I haven't decided," I said. "I'm still evaluating the tenancy of character." "God, Mom." He turned away, pacing. "You sound like a lawyer." "Thank you." That stopped him. He stared at me, realization dawning that the woman who raised him had turned entirely professional about the matter of bloodlines. "I just wanted peace," he said weakly. I folded the last towel, stacked it neatly on the shelf. "Peace without respect is sedation, Eric. You've both been sedated for years." Footsteps creaked on the floorboards above. Soft, deliberate. Melissa. She was listening. Of course she was. Eric didn't notice. He was too busy rubbing at the back of his neck, trying to make eye contact that I refused to return. "Can't we find a way to fix this?" "I am fixing it," I said. "You just haven't caught up yet." He exhaled, long and defeated, and went back upstairs. Through the vent, I heard his muffled voice. "She's serious, Mel. The deed's already filed. There's nothing we can do right now." Melissa's reply was quieter, tighter, the sound of control slipping through manicured fingers. "We'll see about that." A pause, then the faint click of her phone unlocking. I imagined her scrolling, searching. Lawyers, loopholes, maybe even how to challenge a trust. Her tone when she finally spoke again was all frost. If she wants a legal war, she'll get one. I sat back on the trunk, smiling into the half-dark. Upstairs, the floorboards creaked as she moved into another room, her voice dropping to a practiced whisper. She was calling someone. I could tell by the rhythm. Calm, transactional. She'd already found a number. "Hi," she said, barely audible through the vent. "I need to schedule a consultation about a property transfer." "Yes. Soon. As soon as possible." My smile widened. Just a fraction. Perfect. Because nothing accelerates justice like arrogance trying to outthink it. I stood, turned off the basement light, and let the darkness swallow the edges of the room. The hum of the water heater filled the silence like applause. Tomorrow, she'd have a lawyer. And that meant tomorrow, I'd have proof she was desperate. The first crack had formed, not in the walls, but in their confidence. All I had to do now was wait for it to spread. It didn't take long. By Thursday morning, the envelope arrived, thick, self-important, and dressed in legal stationery. The return address bore a local law firm's logo in embossed navy: Wright and Keller, Property and Estate Law. I opened it at the kitchen table while Melissa pretended to scroll her phone across from me. She didn't even blink as I slid the papers free and began reading. Petition for declaratory judgment, verbal transfer of ownership. The words were tidy, professional, and utterly ridiculous. She was claiming that, at some unspecified point, I had verbally promised to pass down the home as a living gift. No date, no witnesses, no proof, just a story with good lighting. Melissa took a sip of coffee, her nails tapping against the ceramic. "You got something in the mail." "I think," she said without looking up. "I noticed," I replied. A beat of silence. Then, still feigning innocence, she asked, "From Howard?" "No," I said, folding the papers slowly. "From your imagination." Her smile twitched, but she didn't rise to it. "You'll need to respond, you know. Lawyers take these things seriously." "Oh, they do," I said, "especially the competent ones." I gathered the papers, slipped them into a manila folder, and stood. "Excuse me. Where are you going?" "To let my lawyer enjoy your lawyer's creativity." Howard answered his phone on the second ring. "I was expecting this," he said dryly before I even explained. "She's filed?" "Filed, stamped, and doomed. It's nonsense. There's no record, no documentation, not even an email trail." "Let her play," I said. "She's loud. I'm legal." Howard chuckled. "That's going on my wall." We met later that afternoon in his office. The same gray drizzle streaked his window, as if Seattle were washing itself of pretense. Howard leafed through the petition with one hand and shook his head. "This is bluffing on paper," he said. "She's hoping you'll panic." "She doesn't understand calm," I said. "It unnerves her." He grinned. "Keep it that way. I'll file our response tomorrow. You'll win this in half a hearing." Back home, the house was oddly quiet. Eric's car was gone. Melissa's wasn't. The faint sound of her voice floated from the living room, clipped and performative, probably rehearsing outrage for someone sympathetic. I went downstairs, craving the solitude only concrete walls could provide. The basement had become more than my refuge. It was my command center. The trunk sat open, papers neatly arranged by phase, deeds, tax records, trust confirmations, and now, one more document. Her formal declaration of desperation. I placed it at the bottom of the stack. Evidence belonged beneath everything else. "Grandma?" Sophie's voice startled me from the doorway. She stood there holding a mug of cocoa, her hair mussed from ballet practice. "Mom said you're moving soon." I smiled softly. "Did she?" She nodded, frowning. "She said it's better that way, but I don't want you to." I walked over, crouched so we were eye level. "Sometimes, sweetheart, moving means others have to leave first." She blinked, processing. "Like musical chairs?" "Exactly like that." Her lips curved into a small conspiratorial smile. "Then you should win." I brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Oh, I intend to." She leaned in, wrapping her arms around my neck. For a moment, the whole war above us fell silent. No legal maneuvers, no whispered schemes, just the steady heartbeat of something worth protecting. When she finally went upstairs, I stayed where I was, listening to the rhythm of her feet fade down the hallway. Above me, Melissa's voice carried faintly through the vents, sharper now, on the phone again, saying words like retainer and strategy. I smiled to myself, slow and sure. Let her dig. Let her spend. Let her call every name in the directory. By the time she realized how deep the paperwork went, she'd already be standing on the edge of her own undoing. The washer clicked off beside me, the last spin cycle done. I reached over, opened the lid, and pulled out a single towel, still warm, the scent of soap thick in the air. Clean, I thought. That's what this would be when it was over. Not cruel, not chaotic, just clean. I folded it, sharp and perfect, and whispered into the quiet. Round 2 begins. The courthouse smelled faintly of rain and nerves, damp umbrellas, wet shoes, and too much perfume attempting confidence. Melissa arrived first. Of course she did. Punctuality had always been her form of dominance. She wore a cream blazer, pearls, and an expression of polite martyrdom, the kind of face that begged sympathy without asking for it. Eric trailed behind her, pale, eyes down, caught in the gravitational pull of her performance. Howard and I entered quietly a few minutes later. He carried the file. I carried nothing. The truth travels light. When Melissa saw me, her smile tightened. "Mother Carver," she said softly, as if we were meeting for brunch, not battle. "Melissa," she gestured to her lawyer, a man in his early 40s with an expensive haircut and the look of someone who practiced empathy in the mirror. "This is Mr. Callahan. He'll be representing me." Howard extended a hand. "Good luck," he said pleasantly. Callahan blinked, unsure whether to take it. We were ushered into the courtroom. Small, bright, no jury. Just a single judge behind a wooden bench that looked older than everyone in the room. The rain pattered against the high windows like faint applause waiting for a cue. Melissa sat upright beside her lawyer, legs crossed at the ankle, her hands folded neatly over a slim portfolio. Her performance had begun. When the clerk read the case name, Carver v. Carver, I saw the smallest flicker of satisfaction pass over her face. The title alone made her feel powerful. It lasted less than 10 minutes. Callahan started confidently, his voice smooth. "Your Honor, my client was promised transfer of ownership of the Carver residence as a verbal gift, consistent with familial intent and long-term occupancy." The judge held up a hand. "Verbal?" "Yes, Your Honor. A verbal transfer, supported by—" "Any written record?" "No, Your Honor, but—" "Any witnesses?" "Not at this time." Melissa shifted in her chair. Her smile faltered. The judge turned to Howard. "Counsel?" Howard rose with the calm of a man who knew gravity would do half his work. "Your Honor, the title in question is held under the Carver Legacy Trust. The trust document is legally binding, properly recorded, and names my client, Mrs. Linda Carver, as sole trustee and lifetime beneficiary. Additionally," he lifted a single sheet of paper. "We've provided 20 years of property tax records, all paid by my client alone." He handed the papers to the clerk. The judge flipped through them quickly, frowning slightly. "All taxes paid by Mrs. Carver?" Howard nodded. "Exclusively. No payments or contributions from the claimants." Callahan cleared his throat. "Your Honor, my client believes the intent—" "The law doesn't care about belief, Mr. Callahan," the judge said flatly. "It cares about proof." A low hum of air conditioning filled the silence that followed. Melissa's hand twitched toward her lawyer's sleeve, her nails pressing faint crescents into the fabric. The judge closed the folder. "Mrs. Carver, you're the sole legal owner. Case dismissed." The gavel hit once, a clean final sound that echoed like punctuation. Melissa didn't move. Her face had drained of all color, her confidence curdling into disbelief. She looked at Eric, waiting for him to intervene, but he just stared at the table, shoulders slumped, the weight of years pressing down. Howard began packing the files with the efficiency of a man confirming what he already knew. I stood, smoothing my jacket. "Thank you, Your Honor." The judge nodded. "Mrs. Carver, you're free to go." Melissa's lips parted. "You can't just—" I turned toward her. "I can," I said softly. And I did. Her lawyer began whispering something about appeals, but she wasn't listening. She was staring at me, eyes bright with something close to fear. I leaned closer, my voice just above a whisper. "It's just business, dear. Nothing personal, unlike your basement." Howard opened the door for me, the gentleman he'd always been. We stepped into the corridor as Melissa's voice cracked behind us, half protest, half disbelief. Outside, the rain had stopped. The clouds hung low, silver and heavy, reflecting the courthouse's pale stone. Howard handed me the umbrella. "You didn't even have to swing," he said quietly. "I never do," I replied. We stood for a moment under the awning. The air smelled clean again. Somewhere behind us, the courthouse doors swung shut with a soft thud, the sound of a story ending for one woman and beginning properly for another. I stepped into the drizzle, each raindrop cold and steady on my skin. For the first time in months, it didn't feel like weather. It felt like release. In the weeks after the hearing, the house grew quieter, not peaceful, just emptied of pretense. Melissa moved through it like a ghost wearing designer heels. Her morning routines lost their choreography. No more curated breakfasts, no scented candles, no hum of self-promotion echoing off the marble counters. Her laptop sat closed on the dining table, the ring light still half-assembled beside it, a dead relic of the life she was trying to film back together. The brand deals went first. The sponsors didn't call, they simply stopped responding. Then came the friends, the ones who had filled her comment sections with heart emojis and envy. They disappeared too, suddenly allergic to failure. I watched it all quietly, from my rightful place upstairs again. The house sounded different now, realer. You could hear rain on the windows, the groan of the old pipes, honest noises that didn't apologize for existing. Eric spent more time at work, or pretending to. When he was home, he stayed in the den, eyes hollow, phone face down. I sometimes heard the faint sound of glass clinking against ice. Guilt is a thirst that doesn't quench. One evening, I found him sitting at the bottom of the stairs, tie loose, hands clasped like prayer. "She's packing," he said quietly. "I know," I replied. He looked up, the boy I'd raised flickering briefly beneath the man he'd become. "You really did it." "I really did," I said. "It was overdue." He swallowed hard. "I didn't know she'd... I mean, I thought she loved the house." "Oh, she did," I said, sitting on the step above him. "She just loved what it made her look like more." He didn't argue, just rubbed at his forehead like he was trying to erase the memory. Later that night, I found Melissa in the kitchen. She was standing by the sink, staring out at the rain that streaked the glass like a slow unraveling. The suitcase by her feet was too small for everything she'd taken from this family, but it would do. "Eric's staying," I said from the doorway. She turned, eyes red but dry. "You think you've won?" "I don't think," I said. "I verify." She let out a brittle laugh. "You can keep the house, Linda. You can keep your trust fund, your paperwork, your smug little victory. But you can't keep him." I tilted my head slightly. "We'll see." She grabbed the handle of her suitcase, yanked it upright. "You're cruel." "No," I said, stepping closer. "I'm consistent." The wheels of her luggage clicked softly across the tile, a sound so small it almost felt apologetic. Eric came in just as she reached the foyer. He looked torn apart, like a man split between two bad choices. "Melissa," he started, voice cracking. She didn't even look at him. "You should have fought harder," she said. Then she was gone, through the door, into the rain that had waited patiently for her downfall. The headlights of her car cut across the driveway, a brief flash of white in the darkness, then vanished. Eric stood there for a long time, the silence expanding around him until he finally turned toward me. His voice broke when he spoke. "I'm sorry." "I know," I said softly. "But apologies don't fix locks." He closed his eyes, nodding. What happens now? Now, I said. We repair what's left. The next morning, I changed every lock in the house. The locksmith didn't ask questions, and I didn't offer any. When he handed me the new keys, I felt their weight. Small, cold, absolute. Outside, the rain started again, tapping against the windows in a steady rhythm. Through the blurred glass, I saw Melissa's car pause at the curb, then drive away for good. I stood at the window, the new keys still warm in my hand. Behind me, the house was quiet but breathing, alive again, like something that had survived a long illness. Howard had told me once that revenge and justice were the same thing, just served at different temperatures. I disagreed. Revenge is loud, justice whispers. And this house, my house, was whispering beautifully. By Sunday, the rain had thinned to a mist. More suggestion than weather, like the world was exhausted from watching. I stood at the foot of the staircase, the new keys cold in my hand. The house was still. No heels clicking, no strained laughter leaking through the walls, no tension pulsing beneath every polite word. Just silence. Clean, generous silence. I started up the stairs slowly, each step sounding different now. Mine again. When I reached the master bedroom door, I paused. It had been months since I'd crossed that threshold, and the air inside felt untouched, still carrying the faint memory of lemon polish and old wood. My boxes waited by the wall, neatly stacked, each labeled in my handwriting from the day Melissa moved me out. Linens, books, desk. I opened the last one first. Inside was the photo from Pike Place Market, me and my husband, hair wild from the wind, our smiles unposed. I set it on the dresser, where it belonged. Then I unwrapped the lamp she'd shoved behind the water heater and placed it on the nightstand, its warm light bleeding softly across the room. The space was smaller than I remembered, or maybe I was just seeing it differently. Not as exile or memory, but as proof. Proof that you can lose a battle without ever conceding the war. I moved the desk back against the far wall. My husband's desk. Solid oak, carved by hand, polished smooth from years of balancing checkbooks and drafting letters. I ran my fingers along its surface, tracing the shallow grooves where his pen once pressed too hard. The grain felt like a pulse under my skin. For the first time since he'd died, I could almost hear him, that low, steady voice that used to say, "We build things so they outlast the noise." When Ruth arrived that afternoon, she didn't knock. She never did. Her voice called from downstairs, sharp as always. "You'd better not still be hiding in that basement, Linda." "I've upgraded," I said, meeting her halfway up the stairs. She stopped when she saw me standing in the doorway of my old room, now bright and alive again. Her eyes widened. "You actually did it. I told you I would." Ruth stepped inside, scanning the space like an appraiser. "You changed the locks?" "Everyone." She nodded approvingly. "And the title?" "Untouchable." A smile tugged at her mouth. "Well, damn. You really moved them out." I shrugged lightly. "They moved me to the basement. I moved them out of their fantasy." Ruth laughed, low and genuine. "You're terrifying." "No," I said, smoothing a wrinkle from the bedspread. "I'm tidy." She walked to the window, looked out at the wet driveway, the empty space where Melissa's car used to sit. "What about Eric?" "He's here," I said, "but quieter. He's learning the acoustics of accountability." Ruth glanced back at me, eyes softening. "And you? What are you going to do with all this freedom?" I thought about it. The clean air, the silence, the unclaimed hours. "I might finally start sleeping in my own bed," I said. She laughed again, but there was something reverent in it. You've turned vengeance into home maintenance. Efficiency, I corrected. She gave a mock salute. Remind me never to cross you. When she left, the house settled around me, comfortable in its new truth. I lit a candle on the dresser. Lavender, simple, calm. The flame reflected in the mirror, small but steady. Outside, the last of the daylight pressed weakly against the glass. I could see my reflection layered over the yard below, the rain-soaked grass, the trimmed hedges, the clean lines of a house no longer pretending to be something it wasn't. I sat at the desk, opened the top drawer, and found one of my husband's old pens. The ink still flowed. I wrote a single sentence on the back of a scrap envelope. Not for anyone else to see, just for me. Order restored. The pen scratched softly, final and sure. Downstairs, the pipes groaned, the old house exhaling. It sounded like relief. I leaned back in the chair and listened. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full. Of memory, of peace, of ownership reclaimed. And somewhere, faint but real, I could almost hear the echo of Melissa's suitcase wheels fading into rain. The weeks that followed felt suspended, like the house and everyone in it were holding their breath between endings and whatever came next. Eric stayed. He slept in the guest room for a while, the one Melissa had once staged like a showroom for her influencer guests. Now it was stripped bare, honest again. He moved softly through the halls, as if afraid to wake the past. He was humbled, yes, but also hollow. Every morning he sat at the kitchen table with his untouched coffee, scrolling through the ghost of his marriage. Old photos, old messages, old versions of himself. One evening he handed me a letter. Divorce papers. She filed last week, he said, her lawyer's asking for half my inheritance. I didn't look up from the teapot I was filling. That's ambitious, considering you don't have one. He gave a quiet, broken laugh. She doesn't know that yet. She will, I said, setting the kettle on the stove. And when she does, she'll call it theft. Eric rubbed his eyes. She already has. Let her. Words don't change math. The kettle began to hum softly. I poured the tea and set a cup in front of him. He stared at the steam curling upward, hands clasped like prayer. I don't deserve to stay here, he said finally. Maybe not, I replied, but you're welcome to earn it. He nodded slowly, and for the first time I saw a man trying instead of apologizing. Sophie came by on Fridays after school. Melissa and Eric had agreed to a temporary schedule, half the week with each parent. Though agreement was a generous word. She always arrived with a backpack full of homework and a sketchbook covered in stickers. Mom says I should stay out of grown-up stuff, she said once, curling up on the couch. But I think you're nicer when you win. I smiled. Winning makes everyone calmer, sweetheart. In the evenings, we played chess. She loved the predictability of it. Rules that never shifted, pieces that behaved. It was everything her home life wasn't. Why is the queen the most powerful? She asked one night, brow furrowed as she studied the board. Because she moves the furthest, I said, and she sees the whole board at once. Sophie moved her pawn forward, grinning. So she's like you. I chuckled. Maybe. But remember, always guard your queen. She nodded solemnly, taking it as literal strategy. I didn't correct her. When Ruth dropped by on Saturday, she found us mid-game, a mug of cocoa beside Sophie's elbow and a faint smile tugging at my own. Well, look at this, Ruth said, hanging her raincoat on the hook. You've turned revenge into an after-school program. Sophie looked up. It's chess. Ruth winked. Same thing, kiddo. After Sophie went to bed, Ruth leaned against the counter. You seem lighter? Dangerous, but lighter. Revenge is heavy, I said, pouring wine. Completion isn't. She studied me for a moment, then smiled. You've turned revenge into a life lesson. It's called efficiency. We clinked glasses. The sound was soft, deliberate. Less celebration, more acknowledgement. Later that night, after Ruth left, and the house fell into its now familiar quiet, I sat at my husband's old desk with a pen and a fresh sheet of paper. The legal kind. Howard had already emailed the draft I'd requested. My updated will. No heirs by assumption. No entitlements by blood. Everything directed through the Carver Legacy Trust. Managed, audited, and shielded from the whims of anyone who confused inheritance with ownership. I signed my name slowly, pressing hard enough that the ink bled through slightly onto the next page. The house creaked once, as if approving. Down the hall, I could hear Eric turning in his sleep, restless, still rebuilding. Sophie murmured in her dreams, her voice light, peaceful. I sealed the envelope, set it in the drawer beneath the deed. Order maintained. But as I closed the drawer, I caught my reflection in the desk's polished surface, a faint outline of a woman both restored and irrevocably changed. There was peace, yes, but it hummed with something else beneath it. Momentum. The kind that doesn't fade after victory. The kind that starts planning the next move before anyone knows a new game has begun. I smiled faintly, reaching for the chessboard we'd left mid-play. The queen stood untouched, perfectly defended. Good girl, I thought. By spring, Seattle had traded its rain for light, still gray around the edges, but warmer, forgiving. The hydrangeas in the front garden had begun to bloom again, a reminder that even the ground knows how to recover. Howard arrived first, punctual as always, carrying a briefcase that looked heavier than usual. Ruth followed, clutching a pie she claimed was store-bought but clearly wasn't. Eric came last, hands in his pockets, shoulders a little less hunched than they'd been in months. I had set the dining table with the same china Melissa once insisted was too dated for content. The irony pleased me. Small gathering, Ruth said, glancing around. But it smells like a reckoning. Howard chuckled as he placed his briefcase on the table. More like a revelation. Eric frowned. What's going on? I poured coffee for everyone, letting the anticipation build. Howard has something to share. I thought it was time to make things official. Howard adjusted his glasses, opened the case, and removed a neat stack of papers bound with a gold clip. Linda and I have finalized the transition of the Carver Legacy Trust into a permanent charitable foundation, he began. It's called the Carver Family Foundation. Eric blinked. A foundation? Yes, Howard said, sliding one of the documents toward him. The property, along with a portion of its appraised value, will serve as the cornerstone endowment. The proceeds will fund annual scholarships for women over 50 starting new businesses. It's an ambitious program, but one with heart. Ruth grinned, sitting back in her chair. Of course it is. Only you would turn vengeance into philanthropy. I smiled faintly. Legacy is just revenge with better manners. Eric was still staring at the paperwork. You gave the house away? I met his eyes, calm and steady. No, I gave it meaning. He looked down at the papers again, speechless. The silence stretched, broken only by the faint sound of rain beginning to tap against the windows. Seattle's applause. Howard continued, his tone softening. Linda will remain the lifetime trustee. The property can't be sold, mortgaged, or divided. It exists now as a living endowment. Her home and her principles will outlive all of us. Ruth raised her cup in salute. Well, I'll drink to that. I took a sip of tea instead. To permanence, I said quietly. The moment was nearly perfect, almost cinematic in its balance, until the doorbell rang. 3 sharp chimes, too deliberate to be polite. Eric stood, uneasy. I'll get it. Before anyone could stop him, the door opened, and there she was, Melissa, standing in the threshold like a ghost who hadn't realized she'd already been buried. Her hair was perfectly styled, but her eyes were raw, ringed with sleepless defiance. "I heard there was a meeting," she said, stepping inside without invitation. "I assume I was left off the list," Ruth muttered, intentionally, under her breath. Melissa ignored her and turned to me. "So this is your next move? You humiliate me, take my house, and then play charity queen?" I didn't rise. "It's my house, Melissa. You just mistook occupancy for ownership." She laughed, a sharp breaking sound. "You really think a trust will protect you from me forever?" "It already has," I said. Howard cleared his throat, producing one more folder from his briefcase. "Actually, Mrs. Carver, this might interest you." He handed it to me. I flipped it open, glanced at the top page, then slid it across the table toward her. "Here," I said. "Something for your records." Melissa snatched it, scanning the first few lines. Her face drained. The heading read, "Certification of Removal. Beneficiary Revocation. Carver Legacy Trust." "You were officially removed from all records," I said. "Retroactively and permanently." Her fingers tightened around the folder, knuckles white. "You vindictive—" "Careful," Ruth said lightly. "Defamation's still a civil offense." Melissa's breath hitched, the fury collapsing into something smaller. Panic, maybe. She slammed the folder shut, trembling. "You think this makes you powerful?" she spat. "It just makes you alone." I lifted my cup of tea. "Alone is safe." She stared at me for a long moment, realizing too late that there was no more ground to stand on. Then, without another word, she turned and left, heels echoing down the hall, the door slamming like punctuation at the end of a bad novel. No one spoke for a while. The rain had grown steady again, soft, but relentless. Finally, Ruth exhaled. "Well," she said. That was satisfying. Howard smiled, closing his briefcase. "Justice always is." Eric still hadn't moved. He looked at me, something like awe mixing with guilt. "You really thought of everything, didn't you?" "Not everything," I said, staring into my tea. "Just enough to make sure the story ends where it should." The house was quiet again. No shouting, no chaos. Just the sound of rain and the faint hum of a legacy settling into place. I didn't look toward the door. There was nothing left out there I needed to see. By early summer, the house had found its rhythm again. The walls no longer listened for conflict. The floors didn't carry arguments between rooms. Even the air felt lighter. The kind of stillness that comes not from emptiness, but from peace, finally settling where it belongs. Eric had moved into a modest apartment a few miles away. 2 bedrooms, plain carpet, a small balcony with a view of the Sound if you leaned far enough. He'd found a quiet accounting job downtown. Nothing flashy, nothing performative. I helped him unpack on his first weekend there. He tried to protest. "You don't have to." "Of course I do," I said, handing him a box labeled kitchen. "You inherited my practicality. Might as well learn how to use it." He smiled, sheepish. "I don't deserve this kind of patience." "Patience?" I shook my head. "This isn't patience, Eric. It's logistics." He laughed softly. It was the first time I'd heard that sound in months. Unweighted. Honest. We set up his bookshelf, made coffee in mugs that didn't match, and stood in the silence of a place that held no ghosts. It suited him. Back home, Sophie filled the quiet that Melissa had left behind. She ran through the garden barefoot, her laughter spilling into the open windows like a benediction. The hydrangeas had grown wild, blooming in reckless color along the fence. She called them Grandma's confetti. On Saturday mornings, she and I would sit on the back steps, watching bumblebees wobble between flowers while the city hummed faintly in the distance. She told me about her new friends, her art projects, the book she was reading about planets. "Grandma," she said once, serious as a scientist, "are you happy now?" I thought about it. About the noise that used to live inside this house, the weight of being underestimated, the precision of my revenge and the order it brought. "I think I'm content," I said. "That's quieter than happy. But it lasts longer." She nodded like that made perfect sense, then darted off to chase a butterfly through the lavender. Ruth came by later that afternoon, carrying her usual mix of curiosity and commentary. She leaned against the porch railing, sunglasses perched in her hair. "You know," she said, watching Sophie run, "you could have just yelled at them. Would have saved yourself some paperwork." "I did yell," I said, sipping my iced tea. "Just in legal language." Ruth snorted, nearly spilling her drink. "God, you're terrifying." "Still tidy," I corrected. We sat in companionable quiet for a while, listening to the wind move through the trees. The house behind us looked different now. Not grand, not imposing, just whole. Ruth broke the silence again. "So, what happens next? You've built your legacy, scared your enemies, tamed your son. Surely you've got another project brewing." I smiled faintly. "Maybe I'll paint the upstairs hallway." "That's it? Peace is a full-time occupation, Ruth. I intend to work at it." She laughed, shaking her head. "You're impossible." "Efficient," I said again. As the sun lowered, the light caught the upstairs windows, the same ones that once overlooked my exile. Now they reflected the garden below, Sophie spinning barefoot, the wildflowers bending in rhythm. Inside, I could see the faint shadow of my husband's old desk, the one where the trust documents still sat in their folder. It was all still mine, but it no longer needed to be a fortress. It had become something else. A foundation. Ruth followed my gaze. "Looks different from here," she said quietly. "It should," I replied. "Ownership changes the view." We stayed like that until the light thinned into gold, and Sophie's laughter faded into the hum of cicadas. The camera would have pulled back there, if life were film. Past the hydrangeas, the weathered porch, the house standing steady against the skyline. Through the upstairs window, a single reflection lingered. Mine. Calm, precise, and entirely unshaken. Order restored. Permanently this time. 1 year later, the rain returned. Softer now. More like punctuation than weather. Seattle in spring always wrote in drizzle. I sat by the fireplace with the folder open across my lap. The last of the documents spread neatly on the table beside me. The final audit for the Carver Family Foundation. Signatures confirmed, accounts balanced, beneficiaries approved. Paperwork had always been my quiet weapon, but tonight it felt like something gentler. Not battle, but closure. The fire hissed softly as a log shifted. The light flickered over the framed photo on the mantel, me and my husband at Pike Place Market, forever squinting into the wind. I ran a finger along the folder's edge, its tabs labeled in my own tidy hand. Trust. Foundation. Estate. Everything in its place. Everyone where they belonged. Footsteps padded down the hallway. Sophie appeared, hair rumpled from sleep, a sheet of paper clutched in her hand. "Grandma," she said, her voice half whisper, half announcement. "I made you something." I smiled. "Let's see." She handed me the drawing, bright colors, uneven lines. A big yellow sun, a house with blue windows, and 3 stick figures. Me, Eric, and her. Above it, in careful, wobbly letters, she'd written, "Grandma's house. Only good people live here?" Something in my chest tightened, the kind of ache that feels both sharp and kind. That's the title I care about, I said softly. She climbed into my lap, curling like a cat against my shoulder. Her small fingers played absently with the edge of the folder. Are you working again? Finishing, I said. There's a difference. Can I help? You already did. Her breathing slowed, steady and content, until it melted into the rhythm of the rain against the windows. When Ruth arrived an hour later, she found us like that. Me with paperwork in one hand, Sophie asleep against my chest, the fire painting us both in amber light. Ruth set down a paper bag that smelled like takeout and amusement. You know, most people retire from revenge. I diversified, I said, easing Sophie gently onto the couch. Ruth laughed quietly, pulling up a chair. The house looks different every time I come by. Lighter, quieter. It breathes better without guilt in the walls, I said. She nodded, then studied me for a moment, her expression softening. Do you ever regret it? Any of it? I considered the question carefully, watching the fire snap and fold in on itself. Only that I waited until they carried the boxes. Ruth let out a low whistle. You always know how to deliver a closing argument. I like endings that hold. She smiled. You're a little scary, you know that? Scary keeps the boundaries clear. We ate dinner by the fire, the rain a steady soundtrack outside. Every so often, Sophie stirred, murmuring something dreamlike about stars or pawns. When the plates were cleared and Ruth had gone, I turned back to the table. The final document waited. The annual report. The last signature required to mark the foundation officially operational. I reached for my pen, the same one that had rewritten my life one page at a time. My name flowed cleanly across the bottom line. Linda M. Carver, trustee. I closed the folder, the sound of paper snapping shut sharp and final, like a verdict. The house exhaled again, the way it always did when balance was restored. Upstairs, the faint creak of floorboards carried like memory, but it no longer haunted. It confirmed. I looked once more at Sophie's drawing on the mantel. The stick figures smiled beneath the yellow sun, and for the first time in a very long time, it felt less like art and more like prophecy. I rose, slid the folder into the desk drawer beside the deed, and locked it with the small brass key I'd kept since the beginning. The fire crackled behind me, a steady, living sound. They moved my things downstairs, I whispered, almost to the flames. So I moved their names where they truly belonged. Off. The key turned easily. Outside, the rain softened to mist again. And for once, it didn't sound like waiting. It sounded like completion.